Hi, good evening everybody. Today our presenter is Gabriella Srikureja. So Gabriella was born in Loma Linda, California and grew up in Spokane, Washington. She graduated from Upper Columbia in 2020 and currently attends Andrews University and will obtain her BS in Chemistry and Mathematical Studies in the spring of 2025. She plans to attend medical school after graduation with the goal of becoming an oncologist. So please help me in welcoming Gabriella.
I want you all to imagine with me. We are on a ship. We are pirates even, sailing the 7 seas, pillaging and robbing and doing all that fun stuff. But one day we begin to notice something strange. Our gums get really red and sore, and a little bit of blood starts to come out. But I mean, we're pirates, we don't brush our teeth, so honestly, how bad could it be? Then our teeth start to get really loose, and some of them fall out, but still, we're not too worried about it. We then notice that our limbs become swollen and rubbery, and these strange bruise-like things appear on our legs. We haven't really gotten injured recently, so we're not sure where the bruises are from, but maybe we just had an interesting night full of sloshing on the waves. But then we start to notice pustules. When these pop, black tar-like ooze starts to come out of them. We start to get really worried, because in addition to this, we grow emaciated. We can hardly stand and we lose energy. Finally, we begin to notice blood coming out of our nose and our mouth and our eyes. We are now panicking because, like 2 million other seafarers, we have contracted scurvy and we will likely die. So, what is scurvy? Scurvy, simply put, is a severe lack of vitamin C. Well, so what is vitamin C and why is it so important to our bodies? How can a deficiency in a single vitamin cause this much harm to us? So vitamin C is, in the L form, it's ascorbic acid, and our body uses it to do a lot of stuff. So primarily, it's used as an enzymatic cofactor, which means that the enzymes in our body need it to be activated or deactivated, and they can't function properly without its presence. Its second most important role in our body is as an antioxidant, and it is able to neutralize reactive oxygen species or free radicals. So this is ascorbic acid and how it operates. Ascorbic acid, as you can see, has a multitude of hydroxyl groups. As the pH of its environment raises, as you can see from pH 4 to pH 11, and our body is around pH 7, it goes into the conformation of that first blue molecule, which is called the ascorbate ion. It is from here that it can do 2 very unique things. It can be oxidized into 2 free radicals. And it's these free radicals that give it the ability to act as an important enzymatic cofactor and as an antioxidant. So to give you a better idea of what we're working with, I found all of the enzymes that it is a cofactor for. As you can see, a lot of these are for collagen synthesis, carnitine synthesis. It's also involved in the demethylation of DNA, so it's involved in DNA replication and DNA repair. So it's involved in a lot of really important things. As we can see, this is a snapshot of collagen synthesis. So our peptide-bound proline and our alpha-ketoglutarate, those interact with an enzyme that's bound to iron. And this enzyme is inactive when it is in the ferric state, when the iron is in the ferric state, or the F3+ state. Ascorbic acid is able to give that single electron to the iron, and it turns into the ferrous state, and the enzyme is therefore active. And once that enzyme is active, the reaction can then proceed. So again, this is what happens where the iron 3+ is changed into the iron F2, and it becomes an active enzyme. A similar thing happens with carnitine. In carnitine, we have a very complicated way of breaking down fats into energy. And so right here where it says step 2, that's where we're going to see ascorbic acid working, and then also at step 6. So here we can see in a different format, the ascorbate comes in with that same iron ion, and it's able to change trimethyllysine into beta-hydroxy trimethylysine. And then again, here at the very end, it's able to change gamma-butane into carnitine. And that's how we're able to break down our fat and make energy in our body. And so finally, going back to ascorbic acid and being able to act as an antioxidant, when we digest foods or when we interact with the environment, we pick up what's called a reactive oxygenated species, so ROS. These reactive oxygenated species are superoxides, hydroxyl groups, peroxyl groups, alkoxyl groups. And all of those, when they interact with tissues, can cause quite a lot of damage because they're so reactive. So what ascorbic acid is able to do is it's able to latch on to these free radicals and reactive oxygenated species and turn them into non-radicals. And so they're much safer for the body to have in them, and they're able to be digested a lot easier. So this miracle ascorbic acid, where can it be found? I mean, it must be rare and hard to find. Well, actually no. Ascorbic acid is found in almost all fresh fruits and vegetables, with a special emphasis on citrus fruits or green leafy vegetables. We can also find it in broccoli, Brussels sprouts, peppers, and tomatoes. So with the prevalence of fruits and vegetables with ascorbic acid so high, then surely we don't have to worry about scurvy anymore.
And his condition got worse.
A man had presented with unexplained rash. Blood tests were inconclusive, but Dr. Dendrimers discovered several high-risk factors.
He was taking lots of junk foods. He had financial issues as well because he was unemployed. He had previous bariatric surgeries 8 years ago.
But he wasn't taking his post-operative supplements because he couldn't afford them. Further tests confirmed no detectable levels of vitamin C, and he then was diagnosed with scurvy.
So then we treated him with a high-dose vitamin C, and within 24 hours he made recovery.
The Premier denies any link to cost of living pressures, instead pointing to the patient's weight loss surgery.
And hadn't been taking his supplements in the way that the doctors wished him to as part of his recovery. So it has nothing to do with the issues that you raised, member.
Dr. Dendrimers says scurvy is not as rare as we might think, and so he wants to encourage other doctors to test for the disease more routinely, especially among patients with high risk factors,
such as financial issues with a history of malabsorption or bowel disease, patients who had previous bowel surgeries.
A Monash University study found almost a third of adult hospital patients had vitamin C deficiency.
The most common risk factor for vitamin C deficiency is in fact low dietary intake, and associated with the cost of living pressures.
With separate New South Wales research finding vitamin C deficiency increased with socioeconomic disadvantage, suggesting better education and
Citrus fruits are our best vitamin C sources.
making fresh fruit and veggies
that same article, they talk about the cost of food. They stated that there was a 40% increase in the price of all goods. There was a 28% increase of fresh produce and a 9% increase in junk food. And they linked this with the increasing amount of scurvy cases that we are seeing, stating that a lot of people are now heading towards eating more junk foods rather than fresh produce because of the lower costs. So if we look at scurvy, we can see some very identifiable categories for who is more likely to get it. So we have people who don't really have a strong network of support, and those are like mostly single adults or the elderly. We also have people who have compromised immune systems or compromised GI tracts, and those are like drug addicts and alcoholics who have changed the way their body functions and they're unable to absorb as much ascorbic acid as they need to. And finally, we have people that are in a low socioeconomic status. So this study was done in 2020, and it looked at the amount of scurvy patients from 2026 to 2020, and I just want to read this one. Of these, 265 individuals were diagnosed with scurvy. Time series revealed that during the course of 5 years under the study, the incidence of scurvy increased from 8.2 per 100,000 in 2016 to 26.7 per 100,000. Population demographic revealed the mean age of scurvy patients was 2.15 years. So that is a 326% increase in the cases of scurvy over 4 years. And we don't only see this in children, we can also see this in adults. This is the results of a study done by the NIH in 2020, and they followed approximately 800,000 individuals from around 1999 to 2019. I don't want you to focus on the individual numbers, but just look at the trends. So we can see that the amount of vitamin C is almost 100 in 1999, and it has decreased to 75 in 2018. The other result of the study that they found was that of the individuals they looked at, 23.8% of them became vitamin C deficient over the course of that study. So this is a serious issue, but what can we do about it? Well, manufacturers have already begun to add vitamin C and other vitamins into various products. One example we can see is vitamin water, which not only includes vitamin C, but vitamin B12 and other really important vitamins to our bodies. Another example that we can see is emergency gummies or other immune support products that contain vitamin C and other metal ions. But the problem that we face with this is that vitamin C, especially in an aqueous environment, is not stable at all. We know that oxygen, metal ions, the presence of oxygen and metal ions really increase the rate of degradation, as well as high temperatures and high pH or a basic environment. So when we look at adding vitamin C to food products, what can we do about stopping these factors from impacting the ascorbic acid so that it can live as long a life as possible? One possible solution is dendrimers. So if you're unfamiliar with dendrimers, dendrimers are branched molecules. They are categorized by two methods, namely the generation and their functional groups. So this shows you a good way that they identify generation. The generation is basically the amount of branching points that a dendrimer has. So the first branching point, if the molecule only had that, it would be a generation 1. Generation 2 has 2 branching points, and a generation 3 has 3 branching points. So dendrimers are very useful because they can protect molecules in several different ways. Firstly, we can see that they have like sort of a mechanical protection. With ascorbic acid in particular, we could have the ascorbic acid enter into one of the dendrimer branch complexes and have it mechanically protected from oxygen or from metal ions, and so we would see a decrease in the change in degradation. The other way that it can prevent is through increasing the activation energy of reactions when it is in the presence of metal ions or with oxygen. And this can happen because of the functional groups that we have around the dendrimers. If we have an interaction, such as an electrostatic interaction between the dendrimer functional group and the molecule that we're trying to protect, that will be harder to break and will cause activation energy of the reaction to increase. So in 2015, an Andrews student named Tylen Yu began research on what was possible with preventing degradation of vitamin C using dendrimers. And she ended up using an analytical method called UV-Vis NIR spectrophotometry. So just as a basis, because I'll be looking at the results of this, and I want you to be able to understand exactly where we got the data that we got. So a spectrophotometer in its simplest terms is a light source, a sample, and then a detector. So the light source will shine light through a sample, and then depending on how much light is transmitted through the sample, it can tell you what the absorbance of the sample is. So this is another picture of it. You have your incident light that's coming before the sample, and then the transmitted light that's coming after the sample. And so our absorbance can be calculated using a log base 10 of the incidence over the transmitted light. And so this is another way of saying we can measure our transmitted light, and by our transmitted light we can measure our absorbance. So vitamin C has a very strong peak around 265 nanometers. This is important to know because a lot of the materials that we use for cuvettes aren't able to to not interfere with light at that wavelength. And so for this experiment, we have to use quartz cuvettes. This is an example of an absorbance spectra that we get from ascorbic acid. And so the initial blue line is when the ascorbic acid is initially mixed with water and it's placed in this quartz cuvette and run through the machine. At 2 hours, we get the orange spectrum, and we can already see that there's a decrease in the absorbance level. And then after 4 hours, we get our gray spectra, and so you can see there's quite a bit of difference between the initial absorbance and the final absorbance. This is important because using this data, we can quantify the amount of degradation that we get. So the percentage of the decrease in absorbance is then stated as our percent degradation. So the honor student who started this project, Tylen Yu, she decided to use several different dendrimers with different functional groups. From left to right are dendrimers. This molecule is ethylene-diamine, and it's not technically a dendrimer, it's a dendrimer precursor. So this was one of our molecules that we used for protection. And then we have G1, G2, and G3 dendrimer molecules. And then at the top, these are the different functional groups that were used. So amine, amidoethanol, polyethylene glycol, and succinamic acid. All of these functional groups were used because we wanted to see what sort of interactions happened between the ascorbic acid and the dendritic molecule. Since all of our reactions were taking place at a pH of 7, the different functional groups would have different charges at a pH of 7, which again is the pH of the body. And so we know that when in the body, ascorbic acid is deprotonated, so it has a negative charge. At pH of 7, our amine has a positive charge. aminoethanol stays neutral, our polyethylene glycol also stays neutral, and the succinamic acid has a positive charge. So from all of these examples, the results that we ended up getting. So we saw that there was a very strong correlation of the polyethylene glycol group and a decrease in the percent degradation. We also saw that the amine group was very successful at preventing degradation from happening. And then if we look at the generation of dendrimers, we can see that the EDA was the most effective molecule at preventing degradation, followed by the G1 dendritic molecule. So what this told us was that the ascorbic acid and the dendrimer complex, the ascorbic acid isn't likely to go inside the dendritic complex. And we can tell this because when we have larger dendrimers, such as the G3 dendrimer, we don't see that much change in the percent of degradation. So what else could be happening? Some of the options are that the dendrimers are surrounding the ascorbic acid and preventing it from reacting. And this would make sense because our EDA molecule is much smaller than our ascorbic acid molecule. And so that would be one way that it would physically prevent reactions from occurring. So if we're not convinced that physical reactions are occurring, the other option is that it's providing some sort of connection with the ascorbic acid and the dendritic molecule. And again, that was our electrostatic interactions or our hydrogen bonding interactions. And so from the amine group, we know that we had a positive charge on our amine and a negative charge on our ascorbic acid. And from that group, we can see that there is a definite decrease in the percent of degradation. So that's likely something that's happening. So these are the results of high-density work. But there is a lot still to discover with using dendrimers and ascorbic acid. Firstly, we have to determine exactly what the mechanism of action is. We're not exactly sure what is happening. We can make some suggestions, as I just did. But to truly find out what is happening, we can use NMR spectroscopy and look at the different hydrogens in the dendritic molecule and tell which ones are being interacted with the ascorbic acid. The other thing that we really want to find out is we've protected the ascorbic acid, but have we actually prevented it from being able to be used at all? So can the ascorbic acid still act as an antioxidant or as an enzymatic cofactor when it's being protected by the dendrimers? And so one way that we've determined to test this, and this is still an ongoing research topic, but that's through the use of DPPH. So DPPH is diphenyl 1-picohydrazole free radical. And it is initially a very deep purple color. And as it reacts with ascorbic acid, it becomes a lighter yellow. So for this part of the research, what we'll use is we'll also use a UV-vis spectrophotometer, and we can tell from the change in absorbance of the DPPH complex, we can tell how much absorbent activity is still remaining based on the change in the ascorbic acid absorbance. And this molecule works really well because, as you remember, ascorbic acid operates by giving up one free radical at a time. And so since our assay molecule, the 2-diphenyl 1-picohydrazole, has a free radical, the ascorbic acid is very likely to interact with that free radical and take it away, as it would in the body with free radicals. So we have a lot of future research that can be done on this field. Firstly, we don't know the impact that these dendrimers will have on the body. whether they're toxic, non-toxic, or what have you. So one option for research is looking at different dendrimers and seeing how toxic or non-toxic they are. And then we also need to see how long the dendrimers are able to stabilize the vitamin C in food. Secondarily, we need to look at if other vitamins can be stabilized in the same way. So this research doesn't just have to stop with vitamin C. It can go on to other vitamins such as like B12 and vitamin D that are also very unstable. And this is a call out to you guys to get involved with research and begin finding out for yourselves what is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We are now opening the floor to any questions that anybody might have for Gabriella.
So I really didn't know, even though the research has been going on, that vitamin C is unstable in water. And so that brings up the point, we have all of these commercial fruit juices that claim to have vitamin C. Is there any sort of like standard by which we can say, okay, in terms of shelf life, is this vitamin C still present? Is it still effective? Because as we all know, we go to the grocery and we have all these products out there. Do they still have vitamin C? Is it still effective?
So the vitamin C that we can find in produce, it's not as much as the manufacturers report. We know that, I think one of the general chemistry labs is using orange juice and finding the amount of vitamin C that's still active in it after I think a couple of years. And you can see that the amount of vitamin C that's still present in the juice is much lower than what they report on the label. And so the question is like, is the vitamin C completely degrading, or is it still, or is it there in an inactive form?
Mm-hmm.
Because the general chemistry lab uses titration to find ascorbic acid, but with titration we don't know if it's in an active form.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go back to a previous slide.
I like that slide, by the way. That slide is pretty. With the veggies and the fruits. It's really pretty. It's cool.
Yeah, so when ascorbic acid is in the body, all of the blue structures, those are the only forms that vitamin C can actually be active in, or the body can use it to do something. And so even if vitamin C is still inside the juice, that doesn't mean that it's in an active form.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have the ascorbate ion going into the ascorbate free radical, that happens very, very quickly. And so when we test to see if there's a presence of ascorbic acid, we could be seeing if there is like the DHA form, which is the dehydroxyascorbic acid.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, maybe some of our current TAs can tell us, since we just did this on Monday, what did we find?
I mean, when we did the titrations, we actually found that we didn't use old orange juice. We actually used new juice like straight from the store, but we found that there was actually more vitamin C in the juice than was actually on the label, and it was almost as if like the manufacturers are like, they know that the vitamin C is going to degrade, so they add a little bit extra just in case.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, I have a question. You said produce earlier. I wonder if you meant products. Like you said, the vitamin C in the produce might actually be lower than what's said. You were talking about the juices, right? Not actual produce like oranges or.
So yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. So when I was specifically talking about the juice I did mean product, But in general, I was also able to find some studies that showed that vitamin C, when it's inside a food matrix, so like if it's still inside an orange, it will still degrade. And so a fresh orange is much better than like a year-old orange as far as vitamin C content goes. And so the one study showed that over the course of the year, I think there was about a 60% decrease in the vitamin C levels when it was still inside produce. And this was when the produce had been frozen over the course of the year.
So most things that we get at the grocery store should be okay, as long as they don't sit for a year.
Yeah, I assume so. But it also brings up the issue that we can't just like ship fresh produce around the world and expect to have it to give us the same benefits as getting fresh foods. And so in areas that don't have easy access to fruits and vegetables, whether that be they can't grow it themselves from famine, from like socio-political conflicts, that people there will often suffer. You'll see like a higher incidence of vitamin C deficiency and possibly even scurvy in those areas, because even imported goods don't have the same amount of vitamin C that you need to survive.
Of course. Thanks.
Yes.
So, Gabby, is it water or is it oxygen that degrades it?
So I found that it was oxygen, and so water, I didn't see anything about it specifically degrading in water. The only thing I found was that if there were metal ions present in the water, then it would degrade faster than if there were no metal ions present in the water.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious, in terms of like, have you looked into the difference between, say, a fruit, like an orange and orange juice versus the emergency, like straight packets, like, and how long would that have like a shelf life of actual vitamin C working?
That's
I don't think those things happen. Sorry.
No, I haven't looked into that at all. I did do some research into saying like, is the reported amount of vitamin C in emergency consistent? And I found that like a lot of the sources were from the manufacturers themselves, so who knows what it actually is. And so they reported that it was about the same. But yeah, we don't really know. But we do know that ascorbate in its solid form is pretty stable. And so when we're doing our research using these dendrimers, we use ascorbate from its solid form and then dissolve it in water and add it to the dendrimer. And so the ascorbate doesn't really start to degrade, or we assume it doesn't start to degrade until we put it into the water.
So based on Randall's question, maybe one of the experiments is to try and deoxygenate the water compared to just normal water and see if you see any effects there.
Yeah, so I think what we ended up doing for, or I shouldn't say we, what Highland Dr. Hayes did for research was that they ensured that the dendrimer and ascorbic acid complex had equal exposure to oxygen, and they did that by including a stir bar into the quartz cuvette while it was being scanned in the UV-Vis NIR spectrophotometer. And so by doing that, we ensured that there was like an equal amount of degradation. But it would be very interesting if we could see what an absence of oxygen would do to the degradation.
So another question I have is, when I visualize those dendrimers, I'm kind of thinking of them as a molecular container. I don't know exactly what shape they are on average, because of course they are dynamic, but did you see or do you know what sort of, especially in the PAMAM dendrimers where there's a possibility of intramolecular hydrogen bonding that sort of like bring the strands, the branches together? Is there any literature or any ideas on what the average shape might be?
Are you meaning for like the average shape of the dendrimers?
Of the
or-
dendrimers?
So, I've seen that it's just like a spherical nanoparticle.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not, in the pictures that I have here, it's, so it's like it's been cut in half and you're looking at it top down. But in fact, the dendritic trees or the branches surround the entire molecule. So it's like a sphere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just real quick, to add on to that, the early research, people had the same question. This was back in the late 80s and early 90s, and they tried to study, and obviously the bigger it is, the more popular and critical it is, but one of the big questions, are the functional groups actually like projecting outwards? And for the most part, they are. I think it needs to be, you know, I think in all the generations, they tend to point out. So,
Okay.
yeah, so that's actually been studied, but that was like, I think it was like 30 years ago, they were looking at some of those papers are a little bit old.
Okay.
And Gabby, I'm pretty sure I didn't direct her to any of those, but,
Right.
but that's foundational.
Yeah.
And there is gaps inside of them, and that's where people, you know, scientists have thought, well, maybe that's where things can go. Some things go in there, we know from our copper-related research. Copper ions could go in there, because Jason's been showing their color change to the copper ion, and that only happens when it complexes with a nitrogen atom, which could be on the surface, but it's likely that it's also interior. So there's a size component. Not everything can get inside. It's
Right.
a certain size and functionality. And there's no evidence from NMR aspirin studies that, like I think aspirin was able to get in there. So
Okay.
it's maybe similar in size
Right.
to vitamin C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so in the study they were looking at, they used ascorbic acid, like the powder form. Was there any like future, like in like taking it like straight from plant matter or citric food?
So which study are you talking about?
Like the one that you researched, like previous Andrews.
Oh, yeah. So, sorry, could you ask me a question again?
Yeah, I was just saying, is it possible to like obtain vitamin C from plant matter, or do you have to just use straight ascorbic acid?
So, I think we ended up using just straight ascorbic acid because of its purity, and we could say that there was a direct correlation between the dendrimer and the ascorbic acid, and nothing else was interfered. But that isn't to say that we couldn't use ascorbic acid or vitamin C from plant matter. The issue is that one of the things that came up while I was researching the background for this topic, vitamin C isn't necessarily ascorbic acid all the time. So ascorbic acid is a man-made synthesized version of vitamin C, but what's colloquially known as vitamin C is sometimes ascorbic acid or like some sort of molecules that are very similar in shape, but it's sometimes like other antioxidants. And so we would have to test each fruit or vegetable that we're using to see if it's actually this particular L ascorbic acid that we're researching.
So, based on the wide diversity of products and stuff containing vitamin C, it probably isn't something on the FDA's radar, right? I mean, it would be an enormous thing to try and set standards to keep track of shelf life. Do you know if the FDA is involved? I kind of doubt it, but
I haven't seen anything about like shelf life as far as ascorbic acid is concerned. I know that they have requirements about stating what sort of ingredients are inside food products, and so because of that, they have to keep within a certain margin of saying this is the amount of vitamin C that we have inside our product. But yeah, I don't think the FDA is very.
yeah, they have more things, other things to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did have, when I was working in, for the Dendrimer company, there was a guy who was telling about the vitamin water industry, and he said, yeah, you know, most of the time the vitamins aren't really that active. So he said there was a way, and that's what kind of spurred all of this, was that if there's a way
To measure.
stabilize the vitamins, so
Okay,
that
yeah.
people are actually drinking active vitamins, that would be really good. Now, the ascorbic acid probably is quite, it's there as we were testing it, I'm sure it's active. But once you start opening it and using it, and,
Right.
that the air and the water, you might have a week or two in the
Mhm.
on the shelf though, if it's, you know, that's why it would be good to look without oxygen, and if the container's blocking a lot of the UV light, it probably lasts.
Yeah.
I think months, you know, but I don't know if it's beyond that.
Yeah.
So the more dilute it is, the easier it is to degrade. So there's a concentration
Effects.
that we'll need to make sure we include in some of these talks. The pH, if the lower the pH, the more stable it is. So maybe inside of fruit juices, if it's more acidic, that also stable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of different factors, so I kind of doubt the FDA will try to come up with some sort of regulation for. Yeah.
I'm sure at least to protect your label
Yeah.
against some kind of, you know, consumer-related litigation. I'd certainly do some testing to make sure, at least during the shelf life,
Right.
that they have something to back up their.
Mm-hmm.
At least with vitamin C, that would be easy enough.
Yeah. You're the co-host.
Well, let's thank her again for her.
It's not a passing grade.